là có buổi hôm nay thì có lẽ là trước hết xin mọi người chắc được nghe là chị Gấm đã giới thiệu qua về VIS cho mọi người, cũng hy vọng là bây giờ ở Việt Nam cái từ VIS hoặc là VIS đã được nghe nhiều hơn rồi, đã được lan tỏa nhiều hơn rồi, thì cũng là xin giới thiệu qua một chút về cái hội trí thức người Việt ở Vương quốc Anh và Cộng hòa Ai-len. Thì nhưng mà trước hôm qua thì đây là cái agenda của cái workshop hôm nay, chắc mọi người cũng đã được gửi đến rồi nên không cần phải lặp lại nữa. Còn về hội VIS thì thực ra được thành lập từ năm 2020, cũng không quá lâu nhưng đã có rất nhiều hoạt động, nhiều impact rồi. Hiện nay thì cái số thành viên là những người Việt mình đang làm việc, những nhà khoa học, những academics, và người đang làm việc và sinh sống tại Vương quốc Anh và Cộng hòa Ireland khoảng trên 120 thành viên rồi. Thì ngành nghề thì rất nhiều các ngành nghề khác nhau, nói chung là chia đến trên 30 ngành nghề lớn và trên 6-70 trường đại học ở bên Anh và Cộng hòa Ireland. Thì mục đích của hội VIS thực ra là gì, là làm sao được kết nối, làm sao để xây dựng một cái hội trí thức, một cái gọi là cái thành phần, một cái community, ở đây mình gọi là intellectual community đi, làm sao ở bên UK nó mạnh mẽ hơn và có thể là hướng về Việt Nam, kết nối được các hoạt động giữa Việt Nam và Ireland và UK. Đồng thời cũng là một trong những cái là rất là quan trọng, làm sao để giúp đỡ các bạn trẻ, bởi vì rất nhiều các thành viên trong hội là những người đã trải qua được rất nhiều các kinh nghiệm, thành công có, thất bại có, nhưng làm sao giúp đỡ các bạn trẻ cũng là người Việt mình đang xây dựng một con đường tương tự thì họ sẽ đi nhanh hơn chẳng hạn. Đấy là những cái mà cũng là một trong tiêu chí mong muốn của hội trí thức mình. Và đây một trong workshop hôm nay cũng là vậy thôi, mình chia sẻ được với những các bạn trẻ đến từ Việt Nam chẳng hạn, muốn đi theo con đường nghiên cứu thì làm thế nào để thành công, tránh thất bại, ví dụ như vậy. Thì đây là ban chấp hành mà chị Gấm có vừa đề cập. Thì ban chấp hành hiện nay thì cho mọi người nhìn thấy qua là rất đầy đủ các thành phần đến từ nhiều trường đại học khác nhau, từ tất cả các quốc gia nhỏ của trong Vương quốc Anh như Scotland, England, hoặc là đến từ Cộng hòa Ireland. Các bạn có thể nhìn thấy có một chair, thì đây tôi đang là chair của hội, đồng thời có hai vice chairs, hai phó chủ tịch, thì đấy là chị Đặng QueAnh mà các bạn cũng được nghe, và bà là phó giáo sư Doan Vinh. Đấy, ngoài ra các bạn có thể nhìn thấy các thành viên khác trong ban chấp hành và rất nhiều người cũng là speaker trong buổi hôm nay và các bạn sẽ được gặp sau. Về dự án thì chị Gấm vừa đề cập rồi, đây là một cái idea, một cái ý tưởng, một kết hợp giữa Hội đồng Anh và Hội trí thức, và đồng thời là một cái partner nữa mà phải đề cập đến, nó gọi là UK Việt Nam Higher Education Network, những người mà hy vọng là thời gian tới sẽ tham gia vào để nằm trong cái gọi là nhóm mentors và để hướng dẫn các bạn, dìu dắt các bạn là trong thời gian sắp tới. Thế còn expected outcome thì chị Gấm cũng đã đề cập qua rồi. Chương trình này có cụ thể là mong muốn làm sao mà giúp đỡ đến có thể là 100 các bạn mentees trong chương trình này, các bạn tham gia vào chương trình này. Thì đồng thời là có rất nhiều các hoạt động, trong đó có những hoạt động chẳng hạn như là đồng thời là cái lượng mà đăng ký làm PhD đến từ UK theo cái dự án 89 của Bộ Giáo dục cũng không được nhiều, cho nên là chương trình có một tiêu chí làm sao để giúp đỡ các bạn đấy tìm được đúng người, đúng các nguồn, đúng các trường và đúng các thầy chẳng hạn, để làm sao được các quá trình mà mong muốn được tham gia học tập ở UK theo cái dự án 89 của Bộ Giáo dục mình, nó sẽ được dễ dàng hơn. Ngoài ra thì chương trình cũng làm sao mong muốn để tổ chức cho một số bạn, những các bạn khá là xuất sắc trong trong các cái activity của cái program, cái project này, làm sao có cơ hội sang được thăm ở UK. Nhưng từ cái này thì tôi sẽ đề cập sau trong các activity cụ thể. Ví dụ như là ở đây có 3 activity chúng tôi đề ra trong cái project này. Một là mentoring đây có nghĩa là one to one, hoặc là mentoring theo một cái small group, một nhóm nhỏ, để làm sao hướng dẫn các bạn về tất cả các thứ các bạn có thể yêu cầu. Chẳng hạn như là từ các bạn đang muốn là học PhD thì chúng tôi sẽ hướng dẫn là cách thức application như nào, hoặc những các bạn đang muốn viết funding thì chúng tôi cũng có thể hướng dẫn được cụ thể mọi thứ. Nói chung là từ writing, publishing, research outcomes cho đến tất cả các career path như nào, building network ra sao, thì đấy là mọi thứ đều có thể được bàn trong cái chương trình mentoring one to one hoặc là small group. Cái activity thứ hai đó là những cái online workshop, và hôm nay là một trong những online first workshop như vậy. Tiếp tới thì sẽ có ba workshop nữa, các bạn có thể nhìn thấy trên kia, chẳng như là về Research Funding Proposal là workshop thứ hai, cái thứ ba là Developing your Career như nào, cái thứ tư thì sẽ dành riêng cho các bạn đến từ các dự án 89. Cái activity thứ ba là Visit to the UK như tôi đề cập ý. Thực ra cái này thì có thể là sẽ được gửi đến thông tin chi tiết đến các bạn sau, nhưng có một cái chắc chắn tôi khẳng định luôn là về mặt tài chính chúng tôi chỉ support được những các bạn nào mà có thể tự trang trải được những chi phí để đi đến UK thì chúng tôi sẽ giúp đỡ tổ chức cho những việc như thế. Còn chương trình cụ thể thì chúng tôi sẽ gửi thông tin sau. Đấy là một cái tiêu chí rất là hay, nếu các bạn nào có điều kiện thì sẽ đến sang thăm và có thể hợp tác chặt chẽ hơn được với các mentors đến từ UK. Thì sơ qua chương trình là như thế, có lẽ đã hơi quá giờ một chút, thì xin quay trở lại. Có lẽ là hôm nay thì xin mời Phó giáo sư Đoàn Xuân Vinh, là có nghĩa là dẫn dắt làm anchor cho chương trình một tí nhỉ. Bây giờ xin trở lại cho Vinh, có thể dẫn dắt được chương trình tiếp theo, giới thiệu speaker được không?
Cảm ơn anh Huấn. Xin chào tất cả mọi người. Thì để bắt đầu chương trình theo như chương trình đã gửi cho tất cả mọi người thì xin mời giáo sư Đặng Việt Anh từ University of Manchester bắt đầu chương trình với How to the Journey Publication Journey.
Mọi người đã nhìn được slide chưa ạ? Ok, xin chào tất cả mọi người. Cảm ơn anh Huấn cũng như là đại diện của VC đã mời để mình có thể được chia sẻ với tất cả các bạn các cái kinh nghiệm để publish. Có lẽ là bởi vì chúng ta hoạt động nghiên cứu thì thường dùng tiếng Anh, cho nên là mình xin được chuyển tiếng Anh luôn. Thế thì let's get started, guys. So the outline of this section today is, first of all, I'll talk a little bit about how to prepare for journal submissions, and then how to deal with decisions. In particular, I'm going to focus very much on how to do an R&R, which is how to revise and resubmit, and then how to deal with acceptance and publication, what is to do after having a paper accepted. A couple of caveats. So my talk today will draw on my experience in terms of being an author and a co-author, also as a review at various economics, finance, management journals, also as the editor of the Journal of Business, Finance and Accounting, a 3-star journal in the ABS list in the UK, and also an associate editor of the Journal of International Financial Management and Accounting. So many of the discussions today will be based on journals in finance, economics, management, but hopefully some of the experiences and points will be also relevant outside of these areas. Okay, so I guess our starting point is a motivation. Why do you want to publish, especially in academia? And there is a saying that probably you would have heard, which is publish or perish in academia. And actually, there's an argument that publishing is perhaps one of the most important parts of the job as an academic. And in the UK, for example, as academics, we are expected to produce high quality outputs, especially for the research excellence framework, which I think runs once every 7 years. And also, if you are even teaching, then there's an argument that a lot of the teaching is based on research. So if you want to provide a deep and comprehensive experience, then teaching has to be based on cutting-edge research. And if you look a bit broader, then clearly, then any recruitment, tenure, and promotion decisions are based very much on the outputs, especially the track record of a researcher in terms of how or where they have published. And outside of these, all of these, objectives, then there's also a discussion around prestige, reputation, or even maybe hobbies or interest you want to publish to get recognized. So hopefully all of these will have convinced you of the need to publish in academia. Having said that, as we know, publishing, especially in good journals, is extremely hard. This is probably, a picture that you have seen already, but I'm just going to reproduce it to show that there's actually quite a lot of barriers, a lot of obstacles for us to overcome to be able to publish in good and top journals. So let me just provide a couple of case studies. And again, I'm going to draw from my experience with finance and management journals. But hopefully the experience or the observations here are also relevant to other disciplines. This is the Review of Financial Studies, which is one of the top finance journals. And you can see here a couple of trends. Number one, over the years, then there's been an increasing in the number of submissions. At the same time, then the number of resubmissions seem to stay quite stable, right? So that means that there's a lot more competition at the very, very top journals. And then secondly, if you look at the acceptance rates, then you can see that number one, there's a very high desk rejection rate, which is that when you send a paper in, then there's a high chance that the paper is not sent out to reviewers, but it's going to be desk rejected. The rate is between 16 and 18%. Acceptance rates has been around 8 and 10%, so has been quite low, even if the number of submissions has increased quite significantly. Now, if you look at another journal, Management Science, which is another top journal in management, you can see again the same trend, which is a gradual but significant increase in the number of submissions. On the other hand, the acceptance rate has stayed around 7.7 and 10%. And obviously, management science, given its prestige and reputation, it draws a high impact factor. So you can see that it's getting tougher and tougher nowadays to get published in those good or top journals. And that begs the question of how do you prepare to submit to such journals? And let me provide a couple of suggestions. Obviously, the assumption here is that you have been able to write a paper based on strong research. If that is not the case, then probably there would be room for improvement, and maybe that would be, the subject or the topic of another section on how to conduct research. But then, if you have a paper already, then the question is, what are the next steps? So I would suggest number one, constantly revise and improve. Polish your paper based on feedback. How do you get feedback? Well, number one, discuss with senior colleagues in your department, discuss with invited speakers who visit your department, and also discuss with your previous PhD supervisors. In other words, try to talk about your research at every opportunity. And of course, don't forget about the Brownback seminars, external seminars or conferences, opportunities for you to present your work and then get more formal feedback. Now, there's a caveat. The process can be quite long, and sometimes you want to shorten it, especially if you are more experienced, if you work with maybe more senior co-authors who know, when to send a paper, or if you are working with ECRs, early career researchers, who are facing some pressures in terms of their tenure clock, who want to submit maybe earlier than usual. Now, there's a graph that I want to reproduce based on, Putin's discussion of publication processes. And here you can see that on the right-hand side, or the horizontal axis, you've got the revision time, and then you have the feedback here on the vertical axis. So obviously, the more time you spend on revising, you will be able to maybe hopefully address the major issues that you have in your manuscript. And then you will have to think about when to stop. You stop when you see the marginal benefit of the feedback is equal to the marginal cost of the delay, the opportunity cost if you delay, right? In other words, you will stop if you see that the major issues that people raise have been addressed, more or less, and then you are only seeing some minor comments and suggestions. That's when you should submit. Now, the next question is, so now the time is right for you to submit, then the question is, what journals that you want to target? There are various lists of journals. The CAPS, as I mentioned earlier on, ABDC, for example, which is the list of journals used by business schools in Australia, and then also the GCR, which is, I think, a broader list that covers not just finance management journals, but also other disciplines. So if you are interested, then take a look and click on these links. Now, in my mind, at least, then the choice of the journals depends very much on a number of important factors. The first factor is obviously the quality of the paper. relative to that of the journal, right? So these factors initially will determine the quality of the journal. So those with the plus sign suggest that you should aim higher. So a better quality would suggest a higher ranking journal in terms of the fit of the topic, the focus, the orientation of the paper. Then obviously, if it does fit well with the journal, then do go for that. Journal turnaround time, very, very important. Obviously, you would prefer, assuming that you have two, equally ranked journals, then obviously you would want to go for a journal that does give you a quicker turnaround, very important, especially for ECRs, those facing tenure clocks. Key references. So if you do cite a number of papers published in a particular journal, then that does give you maybe an indication that you should go for that journal. The edge of the paper, if the paper has been around for a number of years, perhaps you want to cut loss and maybe have to think about targeting a lower ranked journal. And obviously tenure clock, promotion decisions, other deadlines, and potential competitors, they have an impact on the quality of the journal that you want to target. Also, it's important to think about perhaps the journal target at the beginning, even before you have submitted, because it will have implications in terms of how you want to write the manuscript, how you want to format the manuscript, the length of the paper, the type of referencing, and so on and so forth. And then my perhaps final suggestion is that usually always aim high, but perhaps don't overdo it. Go one tier above, but not two tiers. So this is perhaps a graph I would like to go through. So in the UK, for example, especially in business, journals, you've got 4 or 5 tiers, starting with 4-star, the highest tier, going down to 3, and then 2 and 1. So assuming that you are able to write, let's say, a 3-star quality paper, right? Obviously, you don't want to undersell your work by targeting those 1 or 2-star journals. You want to at least go 1 tier above, which is to target a high quality journal. Right, so that means that you are targeting here first, and obviously, hopefully, you get a favorable decision. If not, then you would go down to, let's say, a 3-star journal in your next trial. So that's essentially how you would approach targeting journals. Now, another important discussion is around the criteria that journals often use to screen papers. So I guess these criteria seem to be quite widespread and perhaps quite conventional across different disciplines. This is, by the way, a quote from the former managing editor of the American Academic Review, which is one of the top academic journal. And you can see here that, again, the focus is on the importance of the questions, the novelty, namely contributions, right? And obviously execution in terms of clarity, organization, and length. And then secondly, you have, again, the criteria that we at JBFA, the Journal of Business, Finance, and Accounting, do use. And again, you can see that, among these questions we ask reviewers to look at when they review papers, we again focus very much on number 1, contribution, number 2, contribution again, and number 3, novel aspects. So all the keywords here suggest that, we are placing a lot of focus or emphasis on the contributions of the potential manuscript. I'm going to skip some of these slides. These are to do with how to prepare, especially before submissions, in terms of writing the title abstract, writing the introduction, very, very important, because obviously editors will read this in their first screening. Because I understand that obviously my other colleagues will discuss these sections in more detail in other sections later today. Just a couple of very minor points, but actually they are quite important. So do check the journal submission, the journal's instructions actually very carefully, and follow the correct submission procedures. Otherwise, then the paper would not be reviewed if you don't follow the instructions properly. And don't forget to write a nice cover letter, very important, especially in good and top journals, because it does provide a nice personal touch. And obviously, don't just simply repeat the abstract. People can read the abstract, right? Try to discuss the question in a broader context. Try to highlight the contributions, and not using, the same sentences or the same words like in the abstract or even the introduction. Try to convince the readers of the fit of the paper. You can also maybe indicate potential reviewers as appropriate, or maybe disclose any conflicts of interest. Reviewers that you believe might have a conflict of interest with your work, who will obviously criticize your work. And again, obviously, have the abstract, have the cover letter proofread properly before you send it in. Now, unfortunately, when you are looking at decisions, as you have seen in my case studies, most decisions will be negative, unfortunately. That's the nature of the beast, right? And the question is, how do we deal with a rejection decision? Number one, don't get disappointed or emotional. You can maybe get disappointed for a day or two, but then bear in mind that everybody will get rejected at some point. Most papers, 80% to 90% of the papers will get rejected, even if they are written by Nobel Prize winners or top economists or scientists. So don't get angry or hurt. There's an example, very nice one. Somebody called Akalov, and his paper was rejected in all the top academic journals in multiple times, and then eventually the paper got accepted in one of the other journals, and then the paper eventually won a Nobel Prize for Akalov. So again, the point is that don't get disappointed, move on. And another aspect is that if you don't get rejections frequently, that means that you are actually underselling your papers. If you get a next rejection, again, look at the bright side, which is that you could perhaps move on and then submit to another journal very, very quickly, which is obviously another plus. Now, in most cases, you will get a rejection with reviewers' comments. Now, don't send the paper straight away to another journal. Some comments must be useful. If they are obviously substantive, then you need to address them properly before you want to send it out to another journal. So take a few days before reading these comments, even if they are quite harsh. Try to address them as much as possible within a few weeks or a few months. Don't want to send the paper out to another journal because you might end up with the same comments, especially you could even end up with the same reviewers, and then they will be very, very cross and they will reject the paper again, and you will have a bad reputation afterwards. Next, complaint or appeal. Sometimes you will see reports that are not very, very constructive, and sometimes even comments don't make sense. Now, usually speaking, unless obviously these are major errors, there are major errors in these reports, then you want to just move on, don't complain or even appeal, because you have to accept that there is some sort of randomness in the process. Some rejections here are simply due to reviewers' feeling, because again, the question is, what is the contribution? Some reviewers will think this is, a good paper, but contributions are limited, so reject. And then obviously, typically editors will side with reviewers, so there's limited scope for you to complain or appeal. Turnaround, now typically good or top journals nowadays they want to help authors, so turnaround time is usually within 3 months, and therefore if you don't hear anything, then you might be in a position to send maybe a polite email asking the editor about the status of the manuscript. But be patient. Usually speaking, no news is good news. And nowadays also many journals do provide status updates, so do check out. Now, obviously, hopefully, when we are submitting a paper, we will eventually get an R&R, a revise, resubmit decision. We should be happy. And obviously, we should try to take the offer to revise, even if you have different outcomes, for example, a reject, resubmit, major, minor R&Rs or weak R&Rs. No matter how negative the tone of the letters or the reports are, you are in the sense that you have a foot at the door, and you could maybe open the door by your revision. So, and persevere and prepare for the long run. It's important to recognize that there's no guaranteed, right? There's no guarantee until the paper is finally accepted. So prepare to go through multiple rounds. So what do you do in that case when you get an R&R decision? So number one, read the reports very carefully and maybe add some notes or responses, initial responses. Make sure you've got all the reports, because it's sometimes editors omit reports if they send to 3 or 4 reviewers, right? So make sure you've got everything back. Pay attention also to the editor's instructions, because sometimes editors will say you need to focus on some aspects, but not all of them, and devise some strategies to address all of these comments. Consult senior colleagues who are more experienced, even contact the editor if you are unsure about some of the comments. And the bottom line is that try, your very best, try your utmost to address every single point. Now, there's a saying, this is again from the former editor of the Journal of Financial and Quantitative Analysis, again, one of the top, I think, 5 or 6 journals in finance. And the saying is that you don't want to argue harshly. The referee is usually right. Now, this is not 100%, true all the time. In some cases, you have to argue, but in most cases, you want to take referees' comments on board, because these referees are experts. They can be your future reviewers, and in now field nowadays, typically there's no double blinding in the sense that they know who you are as authors, because you present your work, you have your papers available online, so they know who you are. So if you want to upset them, then be careful about what they're going to do to you in the future. Reviewers will take time to review your work, hours, sometimes days. So editors obviously will be very sympathetic to reviewers, and they would typically side with reviewers. So again, don't want to argue very much with referees unless that is absolutely necessary. Major comments, obviously it goes without saying that try or suggest analysis, address all points. If you are not able to do that, explain why, and even consider doing more than is needed, right? Doing more than needed. Try 100% or 110% actually. If you are facing tight deadlines, sometimes 6 months or a year, and you think it's not enough, then you need to email the editor in advance. You don't want to send the editor an email and then say, tomorrow I can't submit. You don't want to do that. You want to send and alert the editor in advance. Can I have an extension, please, in 4 or 6 weeks? Usually speaking, the editors will be sympathetic and will give you an extension. Next, challenging comments. Now, sometimes you don't have the data to be able to do the analysis. Some tests don't work in your favor. So I guess the best way is just to be transparent, right? You don't want to hide things. And maybe then if the analysis don't work, then perhaps you can think of alternative tests, alternative results to convince the referee. Try your utmost, using the kitchen sink approach, throw in everything you can. And then in the end, if it still doesn't work, then obviously acknowledge that as a potential limitation. Hopefully can link that back to previous research in the area, showing that it is not only unique to your work, but actually is a common drawback of research in this area. Now, sometimes, again, you have silly comments that you think don't make sense. So the way to see this is that maybe your writing is not clear, so that the referees take, your writing, your wording in the wrong way. So rather than saying, referees, you are wrong, I don't mean this. Try to convince the referees by saying that we have revised the phrasing, for example, to make things clearer. Clarify your work. Careful about the tone. You don't want to, again, provoke referees. This is a game where you can only lose. And sometimes if you feel that the comments are so silly, then you have the right to then mention that in your private letter to the editor, saying that these comments, unfortunately, are not appropriate, and therefore we cannot address them. Now, the other comments on the writing and structure, hopefully they should be easier to deal with, because they are mainly to do with exposition and writing. But they might sometimes require you to hire a professional proofreader, and that could be costly, so factor that in. You could also take time, usually a week or 2, to have a paper professionally proofread. So bear in mind, especially when you are facing a tight deadline. Okay, conflicting comments. So you could have maybe 2 or 3 reviewers, and then they give you different directions, right? Obviously, you want to reconcile as much as you can, but sometimes you cannot do that. So what do you do? Well, you have to take side, perhaps. And then the way to do that is that maybe you follow one referee, explain why you do that, and then next time around, allow the other referee to win. That is to follow the other referee's comments or suggestions next time around. Let everybody win sometimes. Now, it's important, very, very important, that whenever you submit your work or resubmit your work, to be more precise, you provide a detailed response memo. to each and every single reviewer. That is to provide a point-to-point response, including the original comments, because referees are busy, so they cannot always remember all the comments. So provide the original comments and then show your response straight away. Show appreciation and seriousness in how you address these comments. Explain any changes made. Refer to any specific sections in your work or any pages. Include all the new materials, including tables, references, figures, analysis, resources, so on and so forth, even in that document. Use the same tone. You don't want to favor one reviewer and then use a harsh tone for another reviewer. Treat everybody equally and with the same courtesy. Make sure the document is self-contained. That means that reviewers don't have to refer back to your original manuscript. So then that means the response memo can be as long as it takes. It could be even 20, 30 pages or even more. Now, don't forget also again, personal letter to the editor when you resubmit. Very, very important, especially in top journals. Clearly highlight, concisely highlight how major issues have been addressed successfully, and discuss issues in the order of importance, and give the editor the impression that you've done your best and the paper is fully responsive to all comments, and as a result has been improved. Now, most R&Rs will go back to reviewers. Sometimes R&Rs will even go back to new reviewers, so don't be surprised. So then what you do is you want to preempt any new potential comments that will be tricky to deal with. So always think 1 or 2 steps ahead, like you play chess, for example. What happens next? Further rounds, if you are invited to do another R&R in the next round, that means good news, right? And usually with each round, then comments will be less tough and there will be a high chance of convergence. So hopefully after 2, 3, or even 4, 5 rounds, then eventually there will be convergence and you will get acceptance. Rejected, tough, but don't worry. It does happen sometimes. It's not rare. So what you do is retain the most relevant comments and move on. And finally, hopefully at some point after a few rounds, you get acceptance, right? That would be the time to celebrate with your co-authors, with your friends, families, and so on and so forth. But don't stop there. Don't stop there. Think about how to improve, how to develop an impact strategy. That is to post your paper on various, websites, public websites, update your webpage, put your work on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, even Facebook, because you know what, maybe professionals, practitioners will learn from your work, and then they will be motivated, contact you. You will be able to improve your impact and ability to conduct or engage in knowledge transfer. Think about writing small pieces for newspapers, magazines. Think about whether it's appropriate to share data or code. Actually, sometimes now some journals would require you to post coding. In many cases, that would be compulsory. Try to maximize citations and impact in various actions that you could do. And then maybe in the next time, if you are invited to review for the journal, then if you want to be on the editor's good list, then think about acting as a reviewer for the journal, and then you work your way up, being then an associate editor, and then finally being an editor for the journal. And then finally, don't forget, the game never stops, right? So even after you have got a paper accepted, maybe relax a few days, and then afterwards think about the next step. What are you going to do next? Think about again the saying, publish or perish. And then that will be maybe then time for you with the optimism for the new publication. You can work on the project, on a new project going forward. So I'm conscious of time. So with that in mind, I would like to wish you all the very best of luck with your submissions. I do apologize. I have to do some teaching, even though I said that research is very, very important, but teaching is equally important. So I do have to teach 3 hours actually from 10. So I would not be able to join you in the later sections, but I'm sure that my colleagues will be able to discuss with you and will be able to share with you many of the insights from their own experiences. So thank you, everyone. Thanks very much. And again, good luck.
Thank you very much, Professor Viet Dang. And it's really appreciate your time with the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next part of this session will be a presentation from me. Let me share my screen. Okay, so good morning, everyone, again. So my name is Vinh Doan, and I'm a reader at Warwick Business School. I'm also one of the vice chairs of VIS. And in the first session, in the previous session, Professor Viet Dang already provided you an overview with the publication journey. And I will continue in this session some about do's and don'ts in research publishing. And in addition to that, I will consider some further consideration, for example, reading and peer reviewing, which would be useful for your own research and the publication. Okay, so this kind of the format of this slide will be kind of very straightforward. It's like a summary of every stages that Professor Viet Dang already mentioned to you. To start with, that would be how to decide where to submit. So the first part is that please do not start writing without a clear plan. So that would be the don't. So what do we do like that for decide where to submit? So you should decide as early as possible which journal to submit. And how do you do that? I think Professor Viet Dang will provide you the list of the journals and how you do that. But basically, that would be the question that you have to ask yourself: where to publish, which journal you should decide. And the most important part would be a good fit with the journal, and you can focus on the journal scope and the objectives. So exactly to see exactly whether it fits with the journal or not. The next part is also very important, that you should consider the potential impact generation for the paper. So this point, I do not focus on the impact factor of the journal, but look at the other way around. You have to ask yourself the question whether that if I submit my paper to a particular journal, whether there would be many people would read in my field, would be able to read my research. So this is about research alignment. So for example, you can look at the sources of paper that you normally read about your research network, where they publish, and try to see exactly whether you are able to publish in those journals or not. And finally, to decide where to submit, sometime if you search for calls for papers, so normally journal will have calls for special topic or special calls for journal, for paper. And those are the things that you can also try to focus on, like calls for papers. So after you decide where to submit, of course, you have to prepare the manuscript. Later on, Professor Ian Chen will talk more about writing a manuscript. But this is kind of the most important thing that I want to mention in this kind of summary. So the first thing is, do not fail to emphasize the significance and novelty of the research. Professor Viet Dang already emphasized the contributions of the research. Normally, when people read a particular paper, they will try to figure out exactly what the contribution of the paper is. So that would be the significance and novelty. What do you contribute to the knowledge, right? So that would be very important. So the part that we focus on today as well about would be the abstract, because the abstract would be the first and foremost part of your paper that reviewer or reader will read. And basically that would be very important to get your point across when you write the paper, and really have to provide a kind of a thoughtful thinking what you want to write in your abstract. And later on in the breakout session, we're going to focus more on the abstract later. The next thing is try to adhere to the chosen journals, guidelines, and instruction for authors, because that would be some kind of specific about the formatting, speak about kind of page limit, or whether you need to write in a particular structure from the journal. You don't really want to really have to go through several rounds with the technical checks with paper before your paper will be able to go to the reviewers. Yeah. So the final part of this one would be proofread the manuscript. You should ask someone, maybe your friends, your supervisor, your colleague, to read your manuscript. so that they will point out exactly whether it's kind of clear, whether your point is getting crossed, and especially when you write not in your native language, sometimes professional proofreading would be also needed. And finally, as Professor Viet Dang mentioned in his presentation, sometime before, to make sure that you can improve your paper before submitting, try to distribute your working paper, try to present your research in a, let's say, seminar, whether Brownback Lunch series or anything like that, to get feedback from people before submission, if it's possible. Yeah. Okay, so after you finalize your paper, you need to make the submission, and do not pay less attention to the cover letter. It's very important, as Professor Viet Dang already mentioned, that you can put a personal touch in your cover letter. Try not to duplicate the abstract in the cover letter, because as we already know that everybody can read your abstract right away. So try to put personal touch, try to explain it in a broader way, in a broader context, so that the editor knows exactly what you try to achieve with your paper, rather than in the technical aspect of your paper. So again, try to follow carefully the journal's instructions for authors, because you, as I said, you don't really want to go back and forth with technical checks. So that exactly that. You have to follow up carefully and accordingly if there are technical checks after the submission from the journal. Do not say that, oh, I already done my bit, and do not follow exactly what they ask you to do. It's very important. And after you submit it, of course, after a few months or a few weeks, you will receive the comment, and you really need to navigate the peer review process. So the one that I want to emphasize more is that do not try to argue with the referees. As Professor Viet Dang mentioned, that referee will be always right, will always be correct in a kind of a broad sense. It's not that they're always right, but basically you will use your kind of argument with the referee. So try not to argue with the referees, and do not revise hastily. That would be very important, that you address all the point that the referees made to you, and do not look to the referee's comment in a negative way. Try to look at the positive side of the comment. You always try to find positive aspect of the comment, because the main aim when you look at the referee's comment is try to improve the paper as much as you can. It could be in your advantage. It's not the other way around. And finally, it's really, you have to comply all requests from the referees if possible, because that's very important, because they are the one who decide or kind of give recommendation whether accept or reject your paper to the editor. So try to address all the requests. That's the main thing. And the final point in navigating the peer review process is kind of the courtesy that you should. And also important for you as well, that you have to revise carefully, even in the case of retraction, and you decide to submit to another journal. Because as Professor Viet Dang already mentioned, the referees can be the same for the other journal. And it's not really nice if they see that the comment that they raised before did not be addressed at all, right? So try to do that as well. So the final part of the kind of publishing journey is after your paper accepted. Of course, congratulations, that's great. But you also need to keep track of the production process. So do not pay less attention to the production process. It's very important, because it becomes your final output in a paper format, right? So check carefully the proof provided by the journal. The proof is really just the preliminary version of the publication that the journal will send to you, so that you will be able to review. It's from the uncorrected proof, and then after you check it every correctly, then it becomes final proof. So pay attention to that proof, because sometimes the editorial kind of typesetting people from the journal will not do a very good job. And you don't want your final paper in the paper form is not really nice. Formatting is really something mistake there. So try to do carefully with the proof. Yeah. Okay. So normally you will need to check and sign the copyright agreement with the journal. Sometimes it's kind of very straightforward, but sometimes you need to be carefully check about the copyright with the journal with the production process. And of course, you should take advantage of offers from journal to boost research impact or dissemination. Normally, they will give you some advanced reading copies or whether there's some free access for a limited time. So you take advantage of that and try to advertise your paper as much as you can using those kind of offer from the journal. Okay, so that would be a summary of what do's and don'ts for the publication journey. I would want to briefly mention, even though I know that the time is already running out, but let me consider two things that I think that would be important for you when you prepare to publish. So the first thing would be reading. And the second thing, of course, would be the peer reviewing. I have 2 minutes, so that's why I will do very quickly. But the first part about reading is why. Why do you want to read? You can learn by example how to write paper from reading other papers. You will keep up to date with your research area, or whether you want to review a new research area, reading would really help. And normally there would be a 3-part approach that I would follow. This is from paper by K-Sharp in 2007. That would be first part would be bird's eye view. The second part would be the content grasping. And the third part would be in-depth details. So the first part would be just 5 or 10 minutes that you would read title, abstract, introduction, and conclusion. So you will see that the important, when you write a paper, that abstract would be very important because that would be something that people would normally read right away. And of course, you also glance at the references to see, oh, whether you need to read additional paper or not in order to know about the content that you want to read. The second part might be just an hour. You want to summarize the content. You don't really do no proof checking for technical papers to go into detail. It just you need to know exactly what would be the paper about. That would be second part. You look at graphs and figures and tables. And finally, that could be third part, about 4 to 5 hours, that when you want really to understand the paper, what it means, and really more important thing is to critically analysis of assumptions, hypotheses, proofs, and everything like that. And most importantly, yeah, you will be able to say, oh, there should be shortcoming in this particular paper, and that would be potential research gaps that you can jump in and expand further. That would be something that you need to consider. Right? Okay, so the next thing that would be how to peer review, right? So why, as Professor Viran already mentioned, that you would learn about the editorial process, and later on, when you are the one who submit your paper, you know what you should do and what you should not do, right? And of course, review paper would allow you to read the paper is not published yet, so it's meaning keep up to date with the current research as well. And peer review, of course, the reading for review would be, the 3 parts would be useful because you start with to see what the contribution, and second parts would be about how significant it is the contribution are. You will see that is, of course, if you read like this, you will know that you will be able to apply whatever you learn in the peer review for your writing, for your paper later on. And of course, third part, you need to consider academic rigor and accuracy in the paper that you read or review. Writing style, of course, you also need to focus on style and structure, whether this kind of flow is good or something like that, right? So let me finalize with the peer review do's and don'ts, and I think I will finish this part after this. So do not include personal attacks when you do the peer review, right? Do not nitpick minute details. As a reviewer, you should focus on the broad picture, on the broad picture. And as I said, be constructive, focus on the paper, not the authors. And you should provide a detailed statement rather than very vague argument, negative argument about the paper. Provide as much as you can, even though it can take time. Yeah, and final point would be you should try to treat others the way you would like to be treated. Even in this case, that is about reviewing and writing your paper. Yeah. Okay, so in summary, so for this part, in this session, we focus on the journey research publishing with journal selection, manuscript preparation, paper submission, peer review navigation, production process, and if you want to really improve your writing and improve the chance of your paper to be submitted, to accept it, then try to learn by example, by reading papers as much as you can, and also try to focus on the peer review process. And I would like to conclude with the quote from Michael Faraday: "Work, finish, publish." And I wish you all the best with your publication journey. Thank you. Okay, so that would be my presentation, and also I'm the role of kind of the chair of the meeting as well, the session and the workshop as well. So this should be the chance for the Q&A, but in terms of timing, I think I already over 3 minutes, and at the end of the workshop, there will be a Q&A question. So I believe that we can leave it there for the final session. And in terms of kind of the schedule, let me stop sharing. In terms of schedule, this could be, we would have about 15 minutes break right now. So if I look at my time, it would be 5:10. So how about we have 10 minutes break where you can take a coffee or something, or water, or rest, and then we will come back here at 10:15. 10:15, that we will come back here, and my colleague, Dr. Ian Chen, will talk with you more about how to write a research paper. Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, so let's start again. So I would like to introduce Dr. Ian Chen from Edinburgh Business School, Heriot University, and she could talk with us about how to write an academic paper for publication.
All right. Thanks, Vinh, for the introductions, and good morning, everyone. Here in the UK, it's morning, and well, in Vietnam, I hope it's in the afternoon. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to these sections on sharing on writing academic paper for publication. Now, we have already got 2 presentations, which are really useful in terms of the publication process. And you have a good overview of how the process look like and what to do and what you shouldn't do. And I think that for me, it's also very, very important before of any technical process of preparing and putting the paper for publication. We also need to know how to write a paper first as well. And there are 2 things in writing a paper. Firstly, from a strategic level, it's about how you actually position the paper and what conversation you join. And once you already have that very clearly, right, in terms of what you're gonna. What conversation you should join, what you're gonna write, then you will go into the process of how to write it. So let's start with this first slide. So before we actually write for publication, and like I have said as well before, that there are many purposes in writing an academic paper. Now you can go to school and you can write an assignment, an essay, you can also write a proposal for research, and you can write a different thing. But writing for publication in journal has a completely different purpose, and you need to know who the audience are and what they're actually looking after as well. So we usually don't just write a research paper or academic paper and then looking for a journal to actually publish. Sometimes it's actually grounded in the conversation of your field or any kind of research gap of that journal as well. So the first thing I would like to actually talk about more strategic level of blending is about the paper motivation. When you write a paper, you actually want to contribute some of the knowledge. You want to add some values. Imagine that you have like this zigzag puzzle, And there's already existing photo of a picture there. And if you actually put one puzzle in there, you need to know if your puzzle actually fit into the existing conversation of that discourse or whatever issue or theoretical issue or any knowledge has been discussed. So, so the first thing about addressing or writing a paper is to address the gap in our understanding. Is there any really a gap there? Is there something we actually don't really know? Is there any new phenomenon which you have observed, which has not been discussed in the knowledge or in the literature? Or is there any literature or theory which are not sufficient enough to explain for that? So it's actually quite important to understand, so what is that gap? And I will bring up some of your kind of research title and research questions which you submitted to illustrate for that. So the audience is actually really important because we actually not just go ahead and describe some phenomena in isolation, but we actually need to benchmark on so what have actually done before. So in a way that we are a researcher and not a journalist, so we know who we are actually audience. They are the scholar of the field. So if you actually do, let's say that in finance and marketing, we actually really need to know that what existing knowledge of this field, and from there we'll see that what we actually observe in the data are actually not well explained by the existing theory. So it is not about your own curiosity, because your own curiosity about you want to know that what are the impact factor of this on the other thing might be your own curiosity, but it's not the knowledge which we have not known. So the conversation is actually really important to prepare when you actually entering this this kind of knowledge pool. So what story you have to tell and what data you have to support. So if you say that there is a certain gap in a certain area, you also need to actually know that if you are going to deliver that finding, then what kind of data you're going to collect? Either you're going to examine the theory by collecting a big pool of data, or you do an experiment, or you're going to interview people, or you're going to observe. So the data where you're going to support as a phenomenon you observe is actually really important to support for your finding. Sometimes the novelty in the process of proposing your finding is actually more in the theory rather than in the empirics. But some of the research, it depends on the area that the empiric, it means your finding of the phenomenon can actually be as equally as important. I will go further and it will get a little bit more concrete. So we need to revisit what do editor and journal look for, and a lot of my talk will be very much similar or closely to the more social science or management research. So if you, let's say that you have theory, and this is actually very important to distinguish between theory, literature, and what you're going to contribute to that. So if you, let's say that if you have a law of gravity, and that is kind of basic theory, let's say. And if you do a research and observe a phenomenon in reality, which actually reflect exactly that theory, then the impact will be rather low, because it's just a theoretical application. And this is very important, because once you decide that your paper is only trying to apply some theoretical framework to explain for something you actually observed, right? So if we explain that if the financial crisis happened right now, it's actually due to a certain kind of behavior of the bank, for example. And if that has been already known in the literature, and you only want to apply that knowledge to explain for what's happened right now, then the impact is pretty low compared to if you actually observe what's going right now and see that how that would actually moderate the theory which you have known. So for example, even in third case would be the wind influence the speed of object falling, moderating the law of gravity. It means that it's not only that you are actually trying to apply that theory in reality, but you also take the phenomenon which you observed and going back to criticize the theory or add on that theory. And theory here is actually the knowledge, okay, of the field, which we as scholars who actually really care about. So when we join that conversation, you need to know what knowledge or theoretical conversation is ongoing. In this case, it's law of gravity. And in your case, that the observation in the reality of the wind and the moderating effect of other things will actually be add on from your research to the existing theory. Now, I know that it can sound a little bit abstract, but we'll as we go along, it's actually will get more important, is get clearer as well. Now, I'm just taking a few things here, and I know that it might take some time, but it is actually very important that you feel connected, because if we just keep presenting, then you don't really feel that how that related to your research. Now, I pick up some of the research title and research question here, and I promise I will not go into very detail, but it's actually quite important that you need to feel that how you actually position your research in that conversation or that knowledge. Now, you said something, the impact of board characteristic and ownership structure on earning management, evident from frontier market. Now, if we look at this title, we could actually really say, okay, you are interested in some impact of some antecedent or some characteristic on something, but it might be that this is just empirical question which you're trying to discover as a journalist, rather than actually we don't actually know about that in the theoretical knowledge. So maybe there would be already a theories on the different impact of different determinants on the earning management, and in your research, you bring in the evidence or the empirical. So this level of research would be more an application of the knowledge we already know to the reality or to the phenomenon we observe. And if you don't go beyond the theoretical knowledge on the impact of these characteristics on the earning, then you only stop at the applying the knowledge to the phenomenon. And in that case, the conversation or the potential impact might be lower. You also have the impact on this. And when I look throughout all the research title, then usually it is about you trying to discover some impact on something, and that's called a variant study, when you actually trying to explore the phenomenon. Now, go beyond this theoretical level, probably you would like to see that how those things will actually challenge back to the theoretical model. For example, in the relationship between community characteristic and CSR's closer, maybe CSR literature have actually done all this research, and what you actually do really here is only applying to explain for the evidence from Vietnam. Now, a lot of research done in Vietnam or by Vietnamese researcher always use the word evidence from Vietnam or the context of Vietnam, but we also need to ask a question that whether something coming from Vietnam is anything add-on for our existing knowledge. Is that something we actually found in the Vietnamese context? Is anything which we don't know? Maybe we'll have already known it from other countries like China or other emerging markets as well. So positioning a research question as a motivation from very beginnings, as me summarizing it, it's actually really important, because when you already have the research position, you can't really change it anymore, no matter how much technique you know in terms of publication process, in terms of how to write editor, how to write manuscript. But if your starting point of positioning is wrong or is not that rigorous, right, which actually leads to a novelty, then it's actually quite hard to actually going back. So so my advice here is that when you actually I will just skip this quickly, that you have to think very carefully about how to address a new and interesting question. Now, in research, there is nothing called interesting or good in general. Everything is about benchmarking what we have known in the literature, what the knowledge so far, and what you're going to add on, what you're going to add on that conversation. So a lot of time, the question would be you have to challenge the conventional wisdom. It means that literature or theory have said that, but you, with your observed phenomenon, will actually come and challenge that status quo. And this is what you propose. So that is about positioning. And of course, it will go hand in hand with the rigor of methodology as well. How you go about to collect the data and ensure the validity and integrity of your data or your finding. Sometimes people will ask that, how do we actually address the research gap? Should we go and review the literature, or should we go and get a hint from a lot of reviewed articles? For example, they will actually propose a research direction, and that might be one of the ways to go. Or if you actually do a publication or be a real researcher, one of the classic way is that you have to embed yourself in the research community, because any of the research gap or research question usually would be in the research agenda of that community. So writing a paper go beyond, and I know that it sounds a little bit like our track, but I think it's actually really quite important that when you are a researcher, you need to identify your research identity. If you have the research identity, you will know what community you actually belong to. And if you go to those conferences, the leading scholar, a keynote speaker, for example, that's how you actually pick up the direction of research. And the reason why I'm actually mentioning that more than other part, because I know that my colleagues have already delivered the talk on, technically the process of managing contributions and research process. For me, it's actually quite important to address the right research question. And this one can actually help you later on to actually build your own research identity as well, because you don't jump around and publish different things, especially when you want to be promoted, right? They will know that what you're known for. When I think of you, what is that research? Either you're known for a certain theoretical kind of area or certain methodology as well. So it has to build very deeply in that. So grounded yourself in the area of your research by engaging in your research communities. I put it here that when you find idea, you go to the field, you attend conferences, and attending conferences again is really, really important. And you talk to people in your research area. So with some guidance on the genre, and I'm also saying that of course you can have your research and then you write about it, and then later on you can start thinking of where to submit the paper. But for me, if you are a real in a way that's if you want to actually really build your kind of very grounded research identity, I think that you need to know your field and research genre before you actually go and write the paper as well. So for example, my research area in strategy, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And of course, it's a little bit eclectic, but in a way that it's actually very grounded in strategy and entrepreneurship, and IB is being the international contact. So if I'm in my field, I know exactly what genre I'm going to target it. I know that there will be international business studies as the 4-star genre, and genre world business, a 4-star genre, and a couple of 3-star genre. So you need to learn. You need to learn your field and what kind of genre out there. And obviously, because as a researcher, you have to read. Right? You have to read a lot in order to actually to update your knowledge and to be aware of what's going on. Then you probably will be already familiar with the type of the genre you are in. And I know that what I'm saying here is a little bit unconventional, but I want to add on something which my colleague have said, because it's not that you had a paper, right? And whatever research question you're curious about, and then now you jump around and go and look for, or go around and look for the genre. You need to know that you are a scholar in this field, and you know the conversation of this genre at this point, and you know that the research agenda of the field by going to conferences and read genre as well. So if you don't have a very clear idea, you can go to the academic journal guide, which is ABS list, and then you can look for, like, if your field is in finance, then you will look at what is the top genre in finance on the operational, and they will actually lead out for you the rank of the genre as well, with the impact and the rank over the years. So good to understand which genre that belongs to different research area. For example, you're in accounting, what are the best genre? What are entrepreneurship, small business, general management, marketing? For example, in management, you have like ASQs or AMR, which is Academy of Management Review, or Academy of Management genre. So some of the very top genre is where the conversations are, where the discourse of what are the current knowledge and what we are lacking, what we need to know. For example, in the general management here, you have Academy of Management genre, and you have consistently four-star as a rank up. So you need to get familiar with the genre first, right? And obviously it goes together with the process of reading as well. And you look at the social citation index and decide on that. So therefore, for me, it's actually quite important to know all this, right? And to ask the right question, because if you ask the right question, it means you join the current conversation of your field. It means they will be likely that they will accept or be curious about your paper submission. Now, like Professor Viet Dang and also Professor Vinh already mentioned, that there are so many submissions and the rate of acceptance is really low. So why should someone or some journal editor accept your writing before they actually read your article? They need to know what is interesting question you actually ask. Is it addressing the current discourse? Is that something challenging or confront the status quo of what we actually know conventionally? For example, in the COVID time, there was a lot of things we actually have been challenged. The conventional way of organizing the organization in a physical way, now challenged by the virtual one. The mental health issues of employees or if of the population becomes actually much more important. The crisis, or for example, in innovation context, the crisis-driven innovation, for example, become actually much more revealing. The method of sustainability and development actually become much more relevant. Now, the COP28 is going to happen in Dubai, will actually bring also another challenge in terms of climate change, in terms of clean technology, so all these trends need to actually to be addressed in a way of your research, because you wouldn't write something which no one actually really appreciate or think that is a timing relevant. So now when it comes to paper structure, once assuming that you have a clear idea of how you position your research and what research question you ask, then you select the journal and follow the template format. This is more concrete. You check the paper published here. And one of the things when I'm always say or have done is that when you publish in a certain journal, you need to be aware of what are the other research have been published in your field or in your topic, and you need to review it in a way that in your literature review as well. So that's why when you got rejected from one journal, you don't very rushly or very quickly go and fix it and submit to another journal. You actually, when you submit to a journal, you need to be aware what conversation, who actually have published in your similar field or have addressed similar question, so that you can actually join that conversation and build that knowledge on that. And usually editor would like to see that as well. So check paper published before the writing style and the word count, and check the editor and prepare to write cover letter. And both of my colleagues have already explained this as well on how to write cover letter. I always think that writing a cover letter, it's really a conversation, and it's really about the impact of what your research and how you're going to add value to that journal. And I think that's quite important. Now, when it comes to paper structure, you also realize that the higher journal it is, the more precise and succinct and clear message they would like to expect from you. It means that any like long writing and long explanations will have to cut through and address to the main point. Dr. QueAnh will talk about the abstract, and all my colleagues also said before that the abstract is really important, and I can't agree more. So in a paper, and especially when you submit for desk reject, they usually actually look at the abstract, because it is a snapshot of why is actually you address this question. What is that you're going to do? And the why here is like setting the scene, right? Because there is an upcoming phenomenon. You have observed this, but literature is not sufficient enough to explain to that. There is some certain kind of rationale in the literature which is actually need to be added, for example. And what is here that you go very directly what you do, because you don't go around and talk about the context. So usually the why, some of the high rank journal doesn't even look so much onto the why. They actually look straight, like the paper explore this, the paper examining this, and this study we explore this, or we doing that. So what is come really early in advance as well. And the how here is the how you're going to deliver that, what you're going to do in terms of methodology, right? We use the survey of whatever and collecting data from this and relies on this set of data. And that is show you how you're actually going about in terms of methodology. And then people will quickly summarize the finding. The finding is that what is that you put on the table? And obviously the so what is that even though you have found that, but who cares? How does that add on to the knowledge? And the knowledge here is actually the scholarly or theoretical knowledge, Okay, so there are two contributions in general in the research, and it has to be very crystal clear from very beginning as well, that what you add on the current knowledge we don't know in the literature. And secondly, it's about what is empirical impact. Is there any managerial implication? Who's going to benefit from that? So that usually the so what we should actually write in the abstract. Sometimes abstract can be just a few sentences, but it has to really say what you do, how you do it, what you find, and what you contribute to that. The style and word count is very, very much depend on the genre, and you probably will have more examples of that as well. So usually in a paper, after the abstract, you could have some of the keyword, and keyword can be 3 to 5 keywords, so that when you are published, or if the editors wants to categorize or trying to sort out reviewers, for example, they will use the keywords to identify what area of research that is. It can be international entrepreneurship, it can be market finance, it can be anything quite relevant to your particular research. Now, once you got the abstracts and these, and I'm really presenting here based on the order of the paper, but in reality, abstract can be actually be written at very end when you have really clear idea about what is that you want to tell, because the message might be not that very clear from the beginning when you start writing the paper. Now, introduction is now it goes to the elaboration, more on the rationale of why you're actually choosing this research, right? So in the introduction, you will get this. Let me see if I have any example on this here. So I just pull out a paper for myself with my colleague, and you can actually really see here that in the abstract, you've got a short kind of snapshot of what you're going to do. But in the introduction, you have 2 ways to write introduction. Either you do the setting the scene, and the setting the scene here can actually become from the very brief review of your research area from theoretical perspective. For example, in this paper, I'm writing about dynamic capability. It means the capability of the organization to respond to changes. Okay, either technological changes or crisis or anything, and how organizations prepare themselves to respond to it. Now, and I know that I'm going to contribute to the conversation about how dynamic capability has been developed and emerged and evolved over the time. Therefore, the introduction I can choose to describe about the current status of the literature. Okay, the evolvement or the historical evolvement of the literature, how important it is, and how it has evolved, and how it has done, and where it is right now in terms of our understanding. And then you point out that your research, how that would actually help to further advance the current understanding of this literature. That is the one thing you can write about the introductions. Okay, I go back to this here. But you can also starting out by talking about the phenomenon or the empirical context. Let's say that you want to address something about very critical about COVID-19, for example, and then you can talk about how COVID has been discovered or happened or evolved, or it has been have a huge negative impact on the life. So you can create this kind of context for that, either from theoretical perspective, okay, or from the phenomenon of empirical context, industry phenomenon of your observation, or you can combine both. You can also say that there is this phenomenon of the COVID-19 and the issue of the current crisis, for example, in financial scene. But the current literature is not sufficient enough to explain for that, because the literature hasn't been built on this context yet. Therefore, it leads to the rationale of your research that you combine that both. And therefore, my research question in this way. So in introduction, people need to understand why is that you actually choose this this research question, okay? And with those rationale or reasoning, it will lead to your research gap. And this research gap will lead to the research question. So usually we say that because there are insufficient a certain knowledge, therefore there will be the question we asked. How to do a certain, let me go back to your own research question. For example, you have something, the impact of digital transformation on the performance of manufacturing enterprises. Now, if you have this research question, let's say that you probably will have a kind of rationale saying that digital transformation is one of the current strategy now they adopted by many firms, because it helps to to achieve business process efficiency. For example, it transforms the way we're doing things, it adds value to our business model, and literally and ultimately it will impact on the performance. However, we only know digital transformation in service-based sector, for example, banking or a professional firm, but very much less on manufacturing enterprises, because manufacturing still require a lot of physical operation. Therefore, digital transformation can only automate a certain part of that global change. Therefore, we wanted to know that without the full impact, how much digital transformation will impact on that. So all that reasoning has to be very clear. And I just give an example. And obviously, I'm not particular in your research area, but you need to revise in this introduction what's the current research have been done and how your context or your particular kind of research interest or the area of research to discover will actually bring in the additional value. You also have, for example, title, Weaving Knowledge Together, Harnessing a Data Fabric Approach for University Knowledge Management. Now, when I read this title, right, the question I'm asking that, is there any study have actually done on this before, right? Weaving knowledge together. So was that knowledge never weaved before? Or is that it has to weave for harnessing the data fabric approach or using this approach? Maybe this approach has not been done before. So if you have this kind of research title, for example, you would actually really say that either the knowledge on weaving knowledge is there, and knowledge together, it means the integration of knowledge. In knowledge management, we call knowledge integration. But using the data fabric approach might be something new, because before we might use a different approach, or maybe in university knowledge management hasn't been applied for that. So there are three options here. Either the knowledge integration mechanism by using data fabric approach has not been studied before. Okay, and this is something you want to propose because it would create a certain whatever efficiency you might looking at, or it has been used, but it's not in the context of university knowledge management, because that is public sector and the mechanism is different. So it means that in the introduction, you probably need to actually laying out, okay, what is knowledge we know about knowledge integration? We know about it, but we don't really know how data fabric can help. Okay, or we actually know everything about that, but in the context of university management, it's very important. And why university knowledge management becomes more important. Now, why should we care? Now, something has not been done, okay, doesn't mean that it's worth for us to do. And that's very, very important in identifying research gap. A lot of the research actually go and review literature and say, oh, this has not been done. Yes, that's true. But the fact that you are looking at university knowledge management, does it add any value to whom, and why should we care about it? So in the introduction, we need to be able to actually rationalize that. So then logically, our reader will actually move on just to see that, okay, now how you're going to deliver it, okay? Now, I'm also saying that in the introduction, it's also more like an extended abstract as well. I'm trying to be really conscious about the time as well. So novelty is in the theory or is in the empirics. Now, in management field or in my field, the contribution or the value of the research, the higher genre is, the more requirement for the novelty of the theoretical contribution, and it's not about the empirical. And I'm just saying in my field, because the empiric usually it's just an application of the theory in a new context. Right, and that is more like a modification of a current theory or theoretical examination. You're trying to examine if the current theory will be applied in this context. And that level of novelty is usually lower. And going back to the orange and the gravity law, the higher conversation you actually add on in terms of theoretical conversation, right? By saying that the examination of knowledge integration using the data fabric approach will actually challenge in the university knowledge context will challenge the current theoretical knowledge integrations model. And actually you need to completely move it on a different angle. Then that would actually be a more theoretical contribution rather than like an empirical kind of evidence. So that you have to really decide on. I have couple of slides on the abstract, but I will just skip it. And I'm, like I said before, that again, the clearer your message is, the shorter usually you have to express or write, okay? Because then you know exactly what you do. And writing a short abstract is actually more difficult than writing a long one, because you need to know crystal clear what is that you want to talk about. So after the introduction and laying out the research question, and then you briefly explain about, you know, I'm going to do this. It's like a pitch, right? So you're saying, okay, this is the gap and I'm going to do it. And you also justify for your potential contribution and the impact of that as well. Then you go into the detail, and that will be a literature review. Now, literature review can sound like a PhD kind of work, and usually in journal article, you actually will say about the research background. And research background here can sometimes, you can also go straight to the heading of your theoretical kind of foundation. And this kind of section is basically justify for what we actually known in the current literature. And from there, we say that, okay, what we actually need to know, therefore there is a certain gap in what our current understanding, if that makes sense. So, right. So you would trying to justify the existing theory. So you review about, let's say that if you actually, I'm just using the last example as well. So if you're actually trying to talk about the knowledge integration or bundling knowledge together, then you probably will review literature on knowledge management, how to integrate now internal generated knowledge and external acquired knowledge, and how you actually disseminate knowledge, how you actually combine that knowledge and adding their value, for example. So that's a whole literature on knowledge management. So you will gonna review on that, and then you will come upon on the mechanism of how you actually integrate knowledge, and then it will come a different thing, and then it will lead to the lack of using a fabric data approach, for example. And then at the end, it will be maybe the context of university that people actually have done this knowledge management integration mechanism in the corporate context, but not in public sector, especially in university. And therefore, all that combination will lead again to crystallize your research objective or research question. So the literature review or research background actually give you the reason why you actually focus on that, okay, and strengthening your rationale of the research. In the literature review, you don't really need to actually talk about methodology here, but it will prepare the nature of the research question will lead to the choice of your methodology. It means that when you write something, it has to be always purposeful writing. And I'm always tell all my PhD students as well, whenever you write something, you need to know why you're actually writing that. So you're writing the cover or review of the literature because you want to tell people that this is what we have known, but that we don't know about this. And you write about this nature so you can prepare for the next part or next section is about the methodology. So if the setting is that the current knowledge, okay, is not sufficient, it's not enough to explain for the phenomenon you're looking for, it means that you're going to build a new theory here, okay? And if you're going to build a theory or you're going to explore what's going on in the phenomenon, so then you can add back to the current knowledge, then it will lead to the methodology of qualitative or explorative, where you go and interview people, you open up to the field, you're trying to see what data emerge, and then from there you conceptualize what you actually observe in the data. You go to observe university, you go to see that how they actually integrate the knowledge, how they actually use the data-driven or data fabric approach, and you go there and see that how the practice of CSR or the application of digital transformation would actually impact on manufacturing company, because you don't know before, right? So now you're actually going to explore. So that will actually lead to your methodology choice. But if you're going to test the theory, let's say that you're trying to find different impact, okay, of the digital transformation on the manufacturing performance. So you already have a list of the antecedents which the literature have discussed. But now you're going to examine whether it actually applies in manufacturing, then you will prepare a examination of theory, which is you prepare a survey with a set of questionnaire, and you go in and try to test, and people will tick A, B, C, and you go and collect and synthesize the data. So anything you write in the literature review will actually lead to the methodology you choose, okay? So the nature of the research question will lead to the methodology choice. Method and approach. Now, I'm not running a methodology class here, but be very, very mindful about when it comes to methodology, you need to understand the paradigms of your philosophical perspective of your methodology. Now, when you choose a method, it is not like a technical kind of process to collect the data. And a lot of people just mix up between a methodology and a method. A method is that the way you approach and solve the question. You can go and collect data by examining the theory or deductive study, by collecting data through a survey, or you can go and interview. That is a method you're doing it. But the methodology or the philosophical paradigms go beyond that. You need to know what is epistemology, what you actually adopt. What is ontology, how you see the knowledge, how you actually acquire the knowledge. And that actually not necessarily have to go into the paper. It's usually go in a PhD dissertation only, but you need to have very good understanding that in order to reflect to the way you actually handle your method. So understand the methodology in its root and depth is very important, rather than just adopting some technical or run some data or run some SAS or SBS and get some data and reporting it. Now, it is very fair and important that when you explain in methodology, not only about the rationale why you're choosing method, methodology, method, and approach, you also need to be very transparent. And I'm saying this because rigor of methodology play very, very important in high-ranked journal publication. Now, you can actually address very interesting questions, but if you don't deliver it in a rigorous way, and rigor is what? Transparent, okay, transparency, I mean how you're actually doing it. The method you're actually using it is also technical enough to support the validities and the integrity of the data analysis as well. So data collection here, you have to report very detailed, and the higher journal it is, the more they actually want you to be transparent on it. Whether you collect data from interview, from survey, how you actually conduct the survey, how you set out the questionnaire, how you actually send out, even as detailed as you send out the questionnaire, what is the response rate, what's the reason, and how you combine the archive data, if it's observation, what is the kind of control of the bias. For example, if you are a researcher and you go there and observe, but you're also working with a company. So all these kind of issue around data collection has to be very clear. Data sampling, people also need to know as well, because one of the things about research is not showing what you do, but you need to let people to replicate your work as well. So if someone wants to continue your research, okay, they can replicate your methodology to further advance that research question. So we have to be very clear. And as not necessarily all the editor or reviewer will ask, but you have to prepare to be asked. If they ask about your transcribed transcription of your data collection or anything related to your data, it has to be very, very and completely work ethical here. We cannot actually make up anything here, right? Data analysis, it really depends on methodology you're actually using. And I'm talking really about social science here. So in my area, there's two distinct approach. One is a quantitative study, when you actually examine the theory deductively, and you will actually design research questions, and then you go and collect, and then you bring back and use statistics or econometrics to analyze. And obviously, because you have a predetermined model, so you just running it. So data analysis will be showing how you actually go about to analyze the data. Now, with qualitative study, when you have a research question where it is an open, so you're going to explore, you have to go and interview, you go and maybe observe an event, and how you actually transcribe and do thematic coding, for example, or you're actually building a replication method. Maybe you interview 5 cases, and the proposed findings come out would saturated. It means that if you ask people what do they eat for breakfast, if 5 people say that it's pho for breakfast, right, then you don't want to ask the 6 people, because you know that the data is saturated at that point. So data analysis sampling has to be described really, really well as well. I think that from what I'm actually seeing, the way you actually are writing your research questions before, I don't want to go back to the slide, that most of the Vietnamese scholars, and I have experience working with them as well, that they usually use quantitative study and or it's a variance study. It means that they're always trying to, not always, but usually the result would be that they find what are the antecedent, what are the factor impact on what. It's more like that, A, B, C, D, impact on D. And that's it. Usually it's quite mechanical in a way as well. So think about the research question, more interesting about unpacking why these 3 things or 4 things will impact on that thing. What a moderating factor in that as well. Now that is still very quantitative study, but the context and the nuance and narrative of the data can actually be added as well. So don't be too mechanical about, preparing a questionnaire and sending out to, I don't know, 100, 200, 1,000 company or individual and ask things. Think about the approach of actually go to do more in qualitative study as well, because one of the things about study in Vietnam is that you can sell the context, because Vietnamese context with a lot of unique characteristic of institution, culture, economic. You can add on a lot of existing theory. So if you go and unpack that black box of how things actually happen, how things emerge and evolve over the time, there will be more opportunity for you to publish coming from the Vietnamese data, because most of the data is actually still very mechanical in terms of looking for variant. So I just keep talking, right? I don't really know how the audience responds, and only if I'm very conscious about the time as well. And I'm trying to say something more different or unconventional, because I know that Professor Viet Dang and Professor Vinh Doan have actually really talked about that. But Vinh, if you could remind me the time, if I'm get a little bit carried away with what I'm talking. Yep. So now you've got the data and you've got the finding.
3
now you
more minutes, yeah.
Yeah. Is that, am I still on track? Yeah.
3 more minutes. Yep.
3 more minutes. Yeah. So when you go to discussion, so now it's actually easy part because you get already the finding. But at the end of the day, remember always that when you write a paper, have a conversation with someone. Don't just go and write things down. Now, there is this very famous cartoon called Charlie and Lola. And when my kid was small, we watched that a lot. And Lola is very, very interesting. She always have this kind of Simon. Simon is her imaginary friends, and she always sometimes Charlie caught Lola was talking to someone and say, "Who you're talking to?" Say, "I'm talking to Simon." And who is Simon? Simon is my imaginary friend I have conversation with. So when I'm writing paper, I always tell my student that you have a conversation with Simon. For example, Simon is some audience, some scholar you want to contribute a conversation. So that is when you actually writing discussion. You need to know who you're actually talking to. Right? So finding means that you get the finding and you elaborate, you benchmark with what the research have done before and say, okay, I'm finding this. I'm finding that in order to have the digital transformation impact on the manufacturing performance, for example, there will be so on and so forth. But the literature doesn't really say that, and I'm adding on that. So if you have that conversation, you automatically can actually lead into what is that you're adding on in terms of extending that theory or actually build on existing theory. So you benchmark with prior research, what are the new, what are similar, what different, what add on, and how that extend our existing knowledge. That would be actually very detailed discussion. Now, sometimes the theoretical contribution part and empiric contribution can go under together with discussion as well, but I'm actually can't highlight out because it's very important that you need to highlight what is that you add as a value. Value added means what you actually put on the table. And we always say that what we know now after your research, which we don't actually know before. And theoretical contribution sometimes can be extension as well. Theory, it doesn't have to be like inventing completely new wheel. You can actually really say that literature is saying this, but we're adding on this, okay? Now, in managerial research or management, you also need to have empirical contribution, who benefit and impact. Now, it's typically Vietnamese-based research will have a lot of implication for the government, like how the government can actually enhance or improve their policies or change the direction, and then it's a manager. So it's macro level and the manager level for the firms as well, and the impact. Now, having said, you always need to have a limitation, and that is actually quite important. And actually, it's eliminate you, so it actually make you safer because you only focus on a certain thing. So pointing out limitation is actually a strength, not a limitation, because you say that I'm only focused on certain thing, and from there you could get an implication for future research. Now, a good research is always need to be aware of what research have been done, what research can be improved after my research, and what the new direction it is. And once you have that in place, you will get to the conclusion where you briefly summarize what you have done. Okay, again, the research rationale, the context, the research question, how the research done, how the finding. And in conclusion, usually the further implication or contribution would actually be very highlighted. And at the end, you need to step back and ask yourself, now, so after my research, after my kind of submission, what do we know now, which we don't need to know before? And that is in relation to your journal as well. If you actually are a truly committed researcher, you usually need to know, you need to read your journal very often as well. I'm always order and read the publication for my journal, which I publish, because then I will know the conversation. Then I will ask myself that now, if I publish this paper, is there any new knowledge which people don't actually know before? And that's it. But there is one thing which I'm always telling my students as well, that there are 3 places you have to repeat your research questions. So firstly, in your, well, actually 4. So one is in the abstract, the second one is in your introduction, the third one in your methodology, and last one in your conclusion. You need to kind of remind people about what you're actually doing as well. So I think that I have a few things about what do and don't, but because Viet Anh and Vinh already said about that, the only thing I'm actually just want to sell, especially because I'm Vietnamese myself, I also learn English as a second language, and I really, experience a lot of these things, and I really think that you need to read a lot before you write. Okay, even if you publish your journal, you need to know what's publication in that journal, and in terms of English. Don't try to think in Vietnamese or try and translate to English. The more you read, the more you start thinking or mimic people, and you will actually start expressing your ideas in sense as well.
I think we do have the issue with Dr. Ian Chen. I think we lost her somehow. So just wait for 1 or 2 minutes to see whether she would come back or not.
I just got. Yeah, sorry, there's a technical issue.
Yeah.
So you can always use a language editor as well. So don't worry about it. So trying to think in your logic, even your language might be not that very good, but think with your logic rather than trying to worry about the language that much. And over the time, you will get used to it. Okay. So sometimes when you got the paper, trying to test the water, and go and present in conference at university, you have a small seminar, and always ask your question. And even you can stand in your mirror and talk about your paper as well. That's what sometimes I do. Why actually you doing that? What is that about? How and what found? So what? And I think that some of these, Viet Anh also said as well, that you submit to higher journal and then you got the reviewer comments, and then from there you can actually improve. Even if you get rejected, there's a lot of values in the reviewer, especially in a high ranked journal. I'm always tell people that you have to cook anyway, right? You got half an hour to cook. Why not cook a good meal? So trying to go for a good recipe and cook fast. And if you fail, you can always do it again. So don't go to a lower recipe or genre, because then it just wastes the time. Anyway, you still have to write. And to be honest, sometimes lower genre, they are even more demanding than actually higher genre, because higher ranked genre, they have standard. So better go and eat good food and know how to cook good food. Don't procrastinate, and I think that everyone will have that problem. And I myself trying to kind of plan a day or full day in a week just to dedicate for the research, because then you don't get distracted as well. And the last point is about co-authoring. And I think I'm just saying one thing, that co-authoring has two ways. When you are junior, you can learn from a senior people, but when you are senior, you can also learn from junior as well. And co-authoring will give you a lot of energy, and ideas should be always bounced back, and you learn a lot from that. And it also shows that you have a good network of people as well. With that, I would like to say thank you, everyone. And I know that I might go over the time, but I open for any question. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Ian Chen. You're only 5 minutes over, so I think that's fine. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think it's a very passionate. I think it's the audience also really feel. I mean, your energy. I think there's a comment in there in your chat for you. Thank you very much. So in terms of timing, I think, as I said before, we will have a Q&A, the general Q&A question. And given the time, let me introduce the final, I think the final speaker or facilitator for our workshop today be Dr. QueAnh Dang from Coventry University. And the floor is yours, QueAnh.
So hello everyone, can you see my screen?
Yes, I think we can.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. So my name is QueAnh Dang. As Dr. Vinh just mentioned, I have been working for Coventry University in the last 5 years. And today I'm going to use these few minutes to introduce you to one part, which is often the shortest part of the paper, but it seems to be a very important part. So I'm going to go through very quickly before we go into breakout groups. So the first thing is, what is an abstract? So do you know the history of abstract? The paper writing has very long history, but the abstract history actually very short. It's only in the current form, is only 30 years old. So the first abstract was published in a medical association journal in Canada in 1960. It's one paragraph, but the current form of abstract is only been institutionalized in 1991. So we got about 30 years of practice writing abstract. How different it is from with words and now. So when, how, and why do we need to write abstract? Normally, people said that abstract would be written at the end when you finish the paper. There are different ways to go about it, depending on which disciplines you are working in, depending on the community of practice that you are part of. But majority of people say that abstract can be drafted. Here, I mean abstract in a paper, published paper in the theme of today, not abstract for a dissertation or conference, because abstract for conference, normally the abstract that before you do the research. Here, I mean the abstract after you have done the research and you already start writing the paper. So normally people say that you need to draft the abstract, but to complete the abstract would be the last job before you submit the papers. So the abstract often is a standalone document. So the abstract similar to a movie trailer. If the trailer is good, you can stimulate people to watch the movie. So the abstract, a very concise and succinct abstract, is about 150 to 200 words. But depending on the journal, you have to follow the guidelines of the journal. When we say about writing an abstract, actually we're talking about three things. Three core things: the title, the abstract, and the keyword. That often the first page of any journal, and that would be the first thing that reviewers, editors will look at. And abstract is also used today in search engine. So people would use search engine to look for keyword and abstract and title. So it's very important to write a very good abstract before you get that rejection or you go further to the next step. So basically, everybody knows what abstract is about. I'm sure that people in the call today have started or have written many papers. So very simple thing. 5 things should be in an abstract, similar to the structures of the paper: introduction, method, result, discussion, conclusion. You need to use a space of about 200 words to convey all those messages. The most important thing is how to write it concise, succinctly. First, you need to really, first 2 sentences, you need to let the reader know what your paper is about. And then the last thing is your research finding, but then what the implication of that, and that the question, so what? And we're going to discuss further in our breakout group about these 5 core component. So I give you an example of what an abstract look like. The component here we divided. You have to allocate a certain amount of words for each component. A conventional abstract would be the first sentence. You need to tell the reader what it's about, and then the next 2 sentences will be the aim and objective, the problem that you're going to tackle. The third one is how you're going to do it, the method, the material, the procedure, the approach. And the 4th section will be the results. And the last one is conclusion and implication. As you can see that proportionally, the length of each sentences or each component, you can see that the last one would normally a little bit longer, because you need to give the hook for the reader to continue to read your paper. But you can also see that a lot of journals nowadays ask for a structure abstract. I like the structure abstract because it gives you a chance to divide different sections, and it reflects the structures of your papers. So you follow the guideline of the journal. But if this structure abstract, if in some cases you got rejection, you can move to other journal, but you can use this structure to revise and convert it into another type of abstract, conventional abstract that I mentioned earlier. Again, similar, but it's very specific what you need to write and how long each section should be. And some journal will be very specific, so do read the guidelines about how to write an abstract. The next thing is I like you to think about your reader. Whenever you write something, you write to a specific group of readers, the reviewers, the editors, and your target audience, the people in the discipline, the academic community that you want to be part of. So 3 things that I think always work, at least with me and with many of my colleagues. That 3 ways to check your abstract after you have finished. Is all information in the abstract consistent with what you've written in the body of the paper? Don't give the editor surprise or disappointment when what you promise in the abstract is not what you did in the papers. Can all of the information found in the abstract can also be found in the body of the papers? You need to reflect the key thing, but you have to convey it in a much more concise way. The third thing to check is the important information of the paper found in the abstract. Are the keywords from the paper missing from the abstract? So if you define some concept and your method, the backbone of your papers, you presented in the paper, you need to reflect it into your abstract and also in the keywords that you mentioned. So how many keywords that you are allowed to depending on the guideline, but normally 5 to 6. It's a very normal practice, that 5 to 6, and you have to carefully choose them, and sometimes you might need to do a quick search of how many times that particular keywords appear in your manuscript. So you can do it very quickly. If you choose 5 keywords, you can quickly see how many times it appears in your paper, whether it's some conceptual understanding that you need the keyword. And these keywords also appear in the search engine for people to search your papers. And the golden rule for me in writing an abstract is 4C: condense, clear, concise, and critical. Critical here, 2 things. Critical mean important, and critical mean that you actually provoke the scholarship and you provoke intellectual curiosity of the reader who continue to read your papers. And the final thing I like to share with you, and a way of wrapping up what all previous speakers have mentioned. So this is the paper published in medical science, but I think it probably this structure may be useful for all other disciplines as well. So this is the fishbowl model. When you have a title, the title is the name of your paper. So what to put in the title? The title should be stating the aim, not the result normally. So you need the title to be informative, clear, but not too long. Normally it's less than 20 words. So title and abstract, introduction, and then at the end, don't forget the references, which is the tail of the fish.